So, people are mentioning it in the chat,
Mhm.
but things are escalating quite a bit in Ukraine.
Yeah, it looks like
Um,
Russia has launched an assault.
yeah. So, does anybody have any thoughts on that? I don't want to ignore it. I know this is a movie show, but it's also a leftist movie show. So, we talk about these things. Anybody have any um, thoughts they want to share?
I'm gonna stay quiet till tomorrow.
Yeah.
Tune in to This is Revolution podcast, where Kuba
Yeah.
Wrzesniewski will be talking all about what's going on in the Ukraine.
Just, solidarity when she was shitty to say this, but thoughts and prayers with the people there who have, you know, everything to lose and nothing to gain from the geopolitical posturing of nations, using them as pawns in a game that is only gonna damage them. It's shitty. It sucks. It's fucked up, and I think a lot of political analysis of these situations is sort of devoid from the human aspect of it, and I try
Mhm.
to, I don't know. I'm just sort of tired of all of it, and just I just feel bad for the people there. It's ass. It's they didn't ask for this.
Absolutely. Agreed.
I
Solidarity
was
with
in the
everybody out
middle,
there.
like all jokes aside, I was in the middle of doing. Kuba had done a video essay, and he recorded himself speaking, the script. And I was going to cut in footage like I usually do, and all of his audio was gone. I don't know what happened. And so he had sent me the script. So I was like, well, look, I cut an intro. Let me try to just read your thing. If you don't mind, I'll just get it done. He goes, yeah, sure, just get it done. I'm sorry that this happened. I was like, oh, no, don't worry. And I can't read the Russian. I just couldn't read the Russian names of some of the countries. I was just fucking it up. So he goes, so he's supposed to be doing it. He says, holy shit, amphibious landing in Odessa. Like he says it's pretty insane right now.
Yeah, this is a real invasion too. This is not good. I know. I mean, I spent time as a baby in Turkey, so I'm very familiar with the area and the geopolitics of the area from my time there being as a baby. No,
Andy.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But no, this is not cool at all. It's a beautiful region. I was too young to remember Turkey, but I am old enough to remember the photos from Turkey, and I was I spent several months off the Black Sea, so solidarity with.
So Kuba's coming. Kuba's coming. So if you give me a link, Joe,
Oh,
I can send it to Kuba.
Yeah, I mean, John Cusack isn't coming, so.
I think Kuba's probably seen this movie too, because he probably.
Lane Meyer.
So let me drop this here. So if anybody still doesn't know, this is the Bad Takes movie podcast with Joe and Andy. Welcoming on our guests here, Jason, Myles, and Rayyvana. And, we're just talking about, the aggressions, the conflict in Russia now, because this is a leftist movie show. But again, thanks, Jason, for hosting us on your channel. That's very sweet of you. But I dropped the link in there for you in our group chat. If you see it there, you can send that Kuba's way.
Yeah, I'm sending it to him right now. Kuba says he can only do audio because he doesn't wear pants if he's not going to be on the show. So I think he's just, what do you young people say? Hanging dong?
I don't say that.
I don't think that's something people really say.
I think it's Donald ducking it.
Donald ducking.
Putin announced a military operation.
With a little shirt.
Jesus. You guys are nuts. Oh, Jesus.
Oh, shit. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be laughing right now.
Yeah, it's not the best night to do a movie podcast about 1980s
I mean,
screwball
it's
comedy.
not like you fucking checked with Putin before you.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know. He doesn't.
And yeah, well, it's not too far off topic because one of the characters is, Roy Stalin. So,
Yeah, right.
Yeah, yeah, that's weird. That
and
isn't
there was a lot of aggression from Russia in that movie. So,
it?
yeah.
It's. I'm trying to find like footage for us to look at a little bit here. There's missiles flying.
Oh, that's Russia. I was like, that's not even Better Off Dead.
No. Yeah, there's missiles flying and all other kinds of craziness. So
This is the part where, Lane got dumped. She
it's all right. It's all right. We got a lot of people in the comments.
Oh
Making some
wow!
interesting
Oh
points.
wow!
Yeah,
He
I
says his
know.
parents are calling him. They're a little worried. Like this is a big deal right now.
Fuck.
Yes.
Someone says, "Quick, switch to Red Dawn." You know what's so funny about Red Dawn?
Fuck. Damn. Oh.
Which one?
I won't watch the remake, and I won't watch the remake of Karate
Okay.
Kid either.
The remake of Red Dawn is actually like really well shot and like
Sure.
just beautifully directed. Like I will, on a complete technical end, they surpassed what they were supposed to be doing. Yeah, the movie sucks. So you're doing all right.
I need to see C. Thomas Howell with the rocket launcher yelling Wolverines.
Yeah, there's also a great twist at the end of the remake. I don't want to spoil it for anybody who
I'm
actually
never
is.
gonna watch it.
But it's just who died at the end.
I mean, Superfly is a Cuban general in the original Red Dawn. It gets no better.
That's right.
Wow.
How do you not cry at the scene where they see their dad in the prison camp? You kids were just so damn little. Avenge me.
Damn, it looks like the good doctor's in. Are you
Coop?
there? Are you there, Kuba?
Is this gonna be audio?
Yeah, that's fine.
He's
Oh,
on,
I have to let
undisclosed
him in. Duh.
location.
Hey, Kuba, how you doing?
I mean, it's not great news, so I'm not going to say I'm doing. Super
Sorry to
well.
ask. Sorry to ask.
No, the situation. It's ironic because last week, when the Russian Foreign Ministry was still playing down the invasion fears and hyping up the sense that this is just Western hysteria, the Foreign Ministry spokesman was asked about the February 16th date and said, European wars rarely start on a Wednesday. And I checked the calendar. Guess what?
It's Wednesday. Is it summer?
Yes, precisely. And so it turns out that it was an even deeper troll than it first seemed.
Jesus.
And what Putin has announced is a military operation in eastern Ukraine. It's unclear what that means and what their ultimate war plans are. I think that given the amount of troops that were mustered and the strategic advantages that Russia enjoys, their army is specially designed for this kind of conflict. The Ukrainians use the same size rail gauge as Russia, which is a big deal because most Russian logistics for conventional military operations are rail-based. So they'll be able to move quickly under favorable conditions. And apart from those logistical, technical considerations, don't forget that they're invading a country whose language they understand. They can read the street signs. They're familiar with it. They can talk to people, and they don't need translators. It's not like the US and Iraq or Afghanistan. So they'll move quickly. I've heard reports that already an amphibious assault has landed troops in the port of Odessa, which is actually way on the western end of the country near the border with Romania. It's a heavily Russian city, so it's favorable terrain for Russian operations. And they've entered the city of Chernigov and are moving towards Kharkov. There have been missile attacks to ground air defenses and air bases in and around Kiev. So I hope that now that it's started, the best outcome would be that it happens quickly with minimum loss of life. And we'll see too how far Russia is inclined to press this invasion. There are territories which are soft and very attractive targets in the sense that they're not heavily defended and strategically valuable while having a population that would be most amenable to becoming part of Russia or a Russian occupation. And that includes the region around Odessa, the oblasts or provinces just north of Crimea and in the north and east of the country. The way that Putin characterizes the opposition in Ukraine, he keeps referring to the Kiev regime. And I would be surprised if he stopped short of going all the way to Kiev to end the conflict in a way that works with the narrative that he's presenting. The Kiev regime would need to go. And in the speeches that he's given to justify an attack on Ukraine, he stressed that the Ukrainian heartland is a part of Russia, that it's a continuity of peoples and territory. If he's committed to Odessa, it's hard to see how he'll stop short of going all the way to Kiev. The lingering question, and for me a source of unease, is whether Russia will go into Western Ukraine, because the territory in the center, cities like Odessa, cities like Kharkov, Dnipro, Chernigov, are ones which have a heavy Russian presence, and until relatively recently had a population that was very ambivalent about their own national identity, whether they were Ukrainian or Russian. Since 2014, there's been a tendency for more and more people in those areas to say they're Ukrainian, but part of that could be pressure from the government. Part of that could be a reaction against the security situation, a feeling that Russia's pushed them into it. But in the western part, it is much more uniform and much deeper in its Ukrainian identity. So those are territories which could only be occupied and controlled with a high degree of repression and violence. It would be like the Brits in Ireland versus the Brits in Scotland. And if he's willing to go into an area where the population is so likely to be hostile and with a much shorter and shallower connection to Russian nationhood and history, then the implication would be that he's willing to deploy that kind of repression and force just for the sake of strategic depth in territory that he knows would be unfriendly and isn't that economically or strategically vital for Russia. So that for me would be a point where we go from a very serious security conflict with clear Russian interests and objectives to aggression against a people that where that occupation would be decidedly unwelcome and harsh. So we'll see what the how the situation develops and what type of resistance the Ukrainian forces are able to mount against Russian advances. One thing that I think we can expect is that Western support won't take the form of a commitment of troops, but some support activities, weapons, materiel, cyber attacks. The British have already said that they're going to mount operations, internet operations against Russian military and government infrastructure. A move where NATO and Russian forces clash directly is not required by any agreement that the West has with Ukraine. And everybody understands that that kind of escalation would internationalize the conflict and pull in the United States and other NATO allies, where a broader, longer war would be inevitable. So I think that ultimately NATO will do what happened, do what they did with Georgia when the Russians similarly entered to support separatist enclaves in South Ossetia and Abkhazia, which is rhetoric, sanctions, but no direct military support.
And Kuba, have you seen the movie Better Off Dead?
How do you feel about John Cusack, a young John Cusack?
John, that guy was a hottie. You know, like
Good take. Good take.
high fidelity. Although I realize that in retrospect it's problematic. But
well, wait till you see this movie.
Have you seen Better Off Dead, Kuba?
I have not.
I think you'd like it from our discussion of movies.
He can't watch it right now. He's got to watch.
I understand.
Got more important things.
He's got to watch.
I actually do have a serious question though. A while back, I heard Stephen Cohen talk about the history of the conflict. I think it was, if I remember correctly, the Georgian conflict with Russia, which we were kind of getting involved with, and he talked a lot about how this was a setup of after Clinton came into office, he started to move NATO into a lot of the former Soviet bloc, which the agreement with Bush and Yeltsin, if I remember correctly, was saying that they weren't going to be moving NATO into that region, and that's been like the starting of the escalation of tension that we've been seeing for the past 25 years or something like that. Now, I've only ever heard him say anything like that, to be honest with you. So I don't know how much of that is true, because I was also watching RT at the time. And I'm not, I'm not trying to say that to dismiss it, but I'm just saying, like, that
there's a spin.
They're probably, there might have been a spin, but also at this same token, like, I've only ever heard one person talk about this, and I've never really done any, taken the time to research like any more of that. So I imagine that's probably, echoes of that might be bouncing around some parts of the left. And I didn't know if you wanted to take a moment to address any of that.
So I've been studying post-socialist and Eastern European and post-Soviet politics since I was an undergraduate in 1998. And
she was born then.
I was born in
The,
97.
You're gonna be 25.
Yeah, so I'll be 25 this year.
Oh,
It's only February,
And-
dude.
Oh my god.
And I was an intern for the Atlantic Council in the Polish Ministry of Defense and the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2003. And it was Eastern European security studies were part of my PhD training as well. And Steve Cohen, absolutely correct. And in fact, he actually soft pedals what happened, which was that as the communist governments in Eastern Europe were collapsing, the question of what to do with Germany came up between George H.W. Bush and Mikhail Gorbachev at the time. And the deal that was struck was that a reunified Germany would stay in NATO, but there would be no eastward movement whatsoever. The former Warsaw Pact countries, like Czechoslovakia at the time, Poland, certainly not the Baltic states or Ukraine, none of those countries were to join NATO. In fact, in the most optimistic parts of the international diplomatic community, there was talk like, why should we have a NATO if there's no Soviet threat anymore? Maybe it should be wound down. And a parallel set of European security organizations, which included Russia as well as the post-socialist and post-Soviet countries, groups like the Organization for Cooperation and Security in Europe, were sprung up, which were supposed to be where, in this new world, new order, security questions are debated continent-wide with full participation by Russia. And the move to expand NATO to cover Poland, Czechoslovakia, the Baltic states, that was seen as a violation of that deal. Yeltsin was too weak to do anything about it, and a new red line was formed. Because the Baltic states were, I mentioned them, I listed them, but they were actually the next wave. The first wave was Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary. And when those countries were admitted to NATO, there was a new deal. Okay, we're gonna let you guys have these countries because they've always hated us. They never really belonged to the Russian space, but you're not going to admit any post-Soviet republics, meaning no Balts, no Ukraine, no Belarus, no Moldova, and no Georgia, Armenia, or Azerbaijan. And then Clinton renegotiated the deal again, unilaterally, right? We're letting the Balts in. What are you going to do about it? The another major watershed was the invasion of Kosovo and the NATO-led mission to allow it to break away from Serbia. Russia was the big international supporter of Serbia, and unlike Bosnia or Montenegro or Croatia or Slovenia, those were kind of province-level republics of Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia falls apart, then they're entitled to independence, as much as Serbia. But Kosovo was always a part of Serbia. And for Russia, what the Serbs were doing in Kosovo was a purely internal affair, and you had to respect the sovereignty of Serbia. NATO led the mission because the UN Security Council would refuse to allow the use of military force against Serbia. In this case, Russia still had a veto. And that move demonstrated that there were no limits to what the United States could militarily do. in Russia's backyard, and that there were no points where a Russian diplomatic voice would be taken seriously. Not at the UN, not in the OCSC, not in any of these organizations that were nominally supposed to look after Russian interests. And that was really the inflection point when even members of the kind of Western-oriented elite began to think of Westerners in the United States, especially, as something other than friendly. And that probably was a great historical turning point. And we're living with the consequences of that decision, as well as dozens of others that followed, in what's going on in the Russia came to the conclusion that the only factor that impacted Western security and military decisions was hard power. And today we're seeing that hard power put into play against a much weaker, disorganized, and vulnerable country.
I just want to make clear for everybody who's watching the stream, I'm scrolling through Twitter and the hashtag Kiev. And so these videos, I have not verified each of these videos that they are in fact footage of what's happening right now there. But Kuba, what is, you mentioned amphibious vehicles and other stuff that you've got reports from. Like, what else does this look like? What does this mean for people living in Ukraine? And
Well,
this is rough.
It's a full-scale invasion, and ultimately how far it goes and how destructive and it gets will depend on the Russian war plans and the ability and willingness of Ukrainian forces to resist and engage. The city of Odessa, and I've seen multiple reports, some from news agencies in the region, of amphibious landings in Odessa. That area is lightly defended and will likely be easy to secure. Some of this will feel like a retread of Crimea, where the Russians meet little opposition and kind of can stake a claim with just the presence of their soldiers. The areas where the fighting is likely to get the most intense are the zones of the front line where Russian and Ukrainian forces have already been in contact through the separatist republics. That's where some of the most disciplined, highly trained, well-armed, and effective Ukrainian forces are located. So the notorious Azov battalion, but also other units made up of staunch nationalist Ukrainians, are likely to slow the advance into Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast from the separatist republics. Russia, the reports I've heard are that there are movements into the northern city of Chernigov, and this is a second front being created from the northeast, which Chernigov is not particularly far from the city of Kiev either. It's one of the first major cities inside of the Ukrainian border, and a point where the capital is quite vulnerable. So the biggest risk is that people get caught between opposing forces, and at the outskirts of Kiev, there's a high danger that the fighting will get quite destructive as Ukrainian forces attempt to defend the capital while Russians move in for one of the most significant objectives. The areas where the most effective and committed Ukrainian forces are also likely to see a great deal of devastation as both sides use heavy weapons to try to break each other. That's the area south of, to the southeast along the Black Sea coast. There was a city, a coastal city on the Sea of Azov, Mariupol, which was very badly damaged during team fighting. And people who can get away from especially the major rail arteries going into Kiev. And right now that the fighting started, it's unclear how much notice anyone in Ukraine will get before the arrival of military forces. If you can get away, then you should, but otherwise, try to stay low and out of sight. The risk isn't that civilians will be deliberately targeted. It's much more that in engaging one another, both Ukrainian and Russian forces can make a mistake or miscalculate and hit civilians in densely populated areas. That's the biggest risk. Of course, you shouldn't go to Ukraine right now if that was in your plans. And I hope that all of this can pass as quickly as possible with as little loss of life. I think that at this point, the Ukrainian government has to either retreat into Western Ukraine, or at least begin to plan such a retreat, or essentially capitulate. And frankly, I don't know which would be the wiser move, because it's unlikely how it's hard to see how the Ukrainian forces can withstand a directed Russian assault like this for long. So heavy, yeah.
Do you have people over there, Kuba?
After the Second World War, I had family that lived in Western Ukraine. Before World War II, it was part of Poland. After the war, it was cut into the Soviet Union, and any Polish people who had survived in that region were deported either into Poland or Kazakhstan. So my family, my aunt's family has an old house in the Ukrainian city of Yaroslav that was in their family before the war. But they have to cross the border to see it.
Wow.
So, I mean, this region has a lot of history of violent conflict, and people can imagine it and think about it in more concrete ways than I think Americans could. But this is going to be a very difficult time. And it's also going to be a very risky time for many Ukrainian journalists, government officials, people in the public sector, and especially civilians that aren't related to government or defense. If they've written, journalists who've written articles critical of Vladimir Putin, or people that are publicly associated with what could be perceived as an anti-Russian side, should leave as quickly as possible.
I've invited our friend C. Derick Varn to join. He'll be here shortly. Man, I'm really sorry to hear all how that's affecting you personally, Kuba, and I can just only imagine like just what this means for so many people all over the world. I mean, the chat's on fire right now, but Jason's got to get going here soon. I don't know if we want to wrap this up. This ain't even everybody's watching this on This Is Revolution. This ain't even my this ain't even my channel.
Do you want to keep going, Joe?
I mean,
you tell me what you want to do.
I'm okay to chat for a little while longer. If you got to get going now, I understand.
No. What I'll do is I'll turn my camera off so it'll keep streaming.
Cool.
So people can
sounds good.
We'll wrap this. Do you want people to go to your channel?
They can stay here. I mean, we don't have to go too much longer. But Varn is here. Hey, Varn, how you doing?
Oh shit!
Hi.
Yeah, things are going to get real.
All right. Thank you, Kuba.
No problem. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that with us. I mean, we like you here on the chat here with Varn and everybody else. But
I'm gonna call you Kuba. I'm gonna hit you up real quick. Is that cool?
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay. Peace, guys.
I also
Cool.
have
Thanks,
to head
Jason.
out. I'm sorry. It's getting towards midnight here, and
no
I
worries.
haven't eaten.
We maybe should just wrap this thing up, but I think we can maybe try to make a little sense of it. But thanks for being here. Let's just the bad takes has been over for a while now, but thanks for doing it, Rayyvana. It was fun meeting you and chatting about this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. All right, have a good rest of your show.
All right.
Cool.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
So Varn, you were getting into it, cutting it up in the chat. I don't know what Tassan's question was.
Cut up anything in the chat. I avoid certain kinds of discussions right now because I think we should limit ourselves to the facts at hand. I've been telling leftists in general that they don't need to have a hot take on everything before they have all the knowledge of the ground, and particularly the historical knowledge.
Yeah, good reason why I asked that question to Kuba while we had him. So
Kuba's the person to ask. I mean, I would have gone over many of the same things, but he knows more than me on Eastern Europe.
Yeah,
and he has people on the ground there. I have some friends in Russia. Most of my friends in Ukraine got out after Maidan, so I don't really know what's going down there. I've been trying to watch China's response to this because it complicates China's policy on sovereignty. Obviously, they're not going to take the U.S. side, and clearly NATO has been poking that bear for 30 years at this point. I mean,
and if memory serves, please correct me if I'm wrong, but the Belt and Road Initiative was part of was that was going through Ukraine, if I remember correctly, or no?
It's part of that. There's also, I mean, there's the Nord 2, which complicates things. There's Russia's own energy security, which people have been talking as if Russia's concerns is either NATO or its own energy security, which to me is wild. They're related directly. But I'm trying to get a better feel for what's going on here. The rhetoric coming out of Putin has been a little wild in that yesterday he was bringing up the specters of Lenin and decommunization and the actual portrayal of Ukrainian nationalism as actually form of Bolshevik policy. In fact, Stalin even defended it in 1921, turned against it slightly in 1928. But it was clearly a kind of slap in the face to any idea this was a reprise of a Cold War narrative. Today's using denazification rhetoric. I would also say that any source in the West should be read with some foreign language news sources in mind, but I would not also trust RT or any Russian sources either. Basically, you have to operate under fog of war assumptions and read third parties who are not particularly attached to NATO. In English, that would be Irish, the Irish press. In other languages, you need to read Spanish or Chinese. China, like I said, clearly isn't going to take the U.S. and NATO's side on this, but their actual stance to what Russia is claiming is interesting because China takes a hard stance on national sovereign integrity, and for obvious reasons. Even if the geostrategic interest and the fears about U.S. interference are the same, the logic on this versus the logic on, say, Taiwan are actually the opposite. And so they're going to have a pretty hard time figuring out the line internally to China. And I'm trying to get a feel on where the other East Asian states are on this, if they have an opinion at all. That's my area of knowledge is not Eastern Europe. My area of knowledge is Latin America and Asia. So that's what I'm really trying to gauge what their responses is. Clearly, I mean, the one thing I would agree is I've been a big fan of Stephen Cohen. I was even at one point a financial supporter of the center, Stephen Cohen's Survival Center on Russian American relations approval, which has not been listened to since 2005. I also emphasize that this is pretty consistent with what Putin warned the West of in his Munich speech 15 years ago. That if they were going to go down this path, that Russia would have to follow suit. And the other thing that we have to look at is all these major powers except China are actually in a weakened state. And in that turns, it is time for people to act. Russia's major developments have mostly been in the military. Its economy is still somewhat sclerotic. And I would say because of that, you really have to be I don't know how to say this, but you have a power that's been bullied by another power, and both powers are fading as far as their ability to influence the world. And Russia needs, the Russian strategic interest we should just look at objectively as trying to solidify its economic zone. And as NATO pushes back on that and complicates its ability to deal with Europe, hard power is all it's going to have access to. We shouldn't have moral readings of this. All of these nation states, with the exception of China, which came out of a revolution, are effectively capitalist nation states. They are all making appeals to prior empires, frankly,
Mm-hmm.
and the actual situation as to what we should take about this is that we should hope that, and we should advocate for NATO staying the hell out of it. Because frankly, for it not to, it risks a world war. And I think, I'm not one of those people who thinks that I don't believe that's Putin's goal. Russia is not an irrational actor, is not trying to start a world war. But, as to the results, if any NATO nation gets attacked or claims to be attacked, Article 5 goes into play. And both sides have mentioned that over and over and over again as a reminder that Article 5 being tripped is a world war that we basically avoided during the entirety of the Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it would be the greatest fucking sick, sad irony if that world war that we feel that like fueled the Cold War finally happens because of basically shit that was really pushed by both parties in the United States in the late 90s. Because that's what this mostly goes back to. This is likely to, the best case scenario is what this is similar to Georgia, that this is diplomacy by hard force. And for those you don't know, Georgia in 2008. That's the good scenario. The bad scenario is somebody acts irrationally, and does something to invoke Article 5, which I assure you, Putin would not do unadvisedly. Because, like I said, anyone who's trying to sell you that Russia is an irrational actor or wants to provoke a world war is basically, you should treat as a war hawk.
I think Putin knows exactly what he can get away with, and we're seeing it right now.
Right, and frankly, we should know that the U.S. is in no place to do much about it. Because to do something about it, let's be frank here, puts the two most nuclear armed powers on the planet back at odds with all of our, albeit half faded and nuclearly depleted, and thus maybe even more unstable arms just sitting there from the 80s that we haven't even really been thinking about this entire last 25 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man. I'm within miles of Vandenberg, where they've been testing this shit, where they say they don't have any, but we all know they do.
The one thing I would also say is we're not, because of the current sitting president and because how weak Biden is, and we should be we should be very clear-eyed about how weak the Democrats appear on all fronts right now. This is actually a really dangerous time period. AOC split the baby post on Twitter, and I don't think people should be looking at Twitter for shit right now, but if you're gonna follow,
maybe videos, but yeah,
videos maybe. Look at videos, compare and contrast, but no, also
then some of those videos aren't always today.
So, but I was about to say, but videos have been manipulated before. That's not my point. My point is AOC today was like talking about the need for further sanctions and mentioning that any military action should be voted on by Congress, which I know is a split the baby move. It's supposed to remind the presidents not to invoke Police Powers Act, which is how all wars have happened since the Police Powers Act was passed, ironically, when the U.S. joined the UN. And then the attempt to limit the Police Powers Act in the 70s actually made it even easier for presidents to basically lock the United States down in war because Congress won't pull funding to troops, even though they have the power to do so once they've been deployed. So again, this is why electoralism has strong limits, because a lot of these reforms actually accelerate the things they are supposedly supposed to fix. But I say this because it's clear to me that it's clear to me that you're not going to be able to rely on the squad or any of that shit to be a voice of reason in Congress right now, and people should have no illusions about that. I mean, because they're going to split the baby like they have on all this stuff, and splitting the baby at this point is effectively capitulating to U.S. policy. That said, Biden has said that they can't commit troops on the ground, and as I mean, I hate to be this crass and cynical about politics, but they also realize it would not help them in the midterms to be in a very unpopular war in a highly divided country with a weak president, and when they're already slated to lose really bad. And I don't. I mean, we're in a strange time, actually, when Candace Owens, for completely cynical reasons, might be actually posting takes that are actually correct on the history of NATO, whereas AOC is splitting the baby, and the Democrats are like. I saw some Democrat adjacent lawyer today trying to argue that conservatives aiding saying nice things about Putin was a violation of Article 3 in the Constitution, which is treason, which would require. I mean, it was just wild they would even pretend that, because it requires like proof that it left to 2 direct American deaths and a formal declaration of war to count as an enemy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you can see all these kinds of. You literally see a section of the Democrats picking up the playbook that we saw from the Republicans in 2000 and 2001, 2002, 2003, with category expansions about treason and whatnot. So, I mean, we should be worried.
Sounds like a Seth Abramson tweet thread or something.
So yeah. I think really importantly too, before we really wander from this right here, what should we be doing right now? Like what actions as leftists, besides thinking about stuff, but like what organizations, what protests, how should we be petitioning?
Can I be like completely frank for a minute? You can't do shit about this.
There's really nothing we can do.
I understand that, but it does feel good to get out there and protest sometimes. And I think that
I think we should also look that in the last week, all right, we had protesters get shot at.
Yep.
To achieve what?
Yeah.
Like, we are not in an environment where even protesting does much but draw a target on your chest. I mean, I say this as a person. I know it feels good to protest. I mean, like, I remember going out to some of the largest protests in 2001, 2002. I'm old, right? But like, those didn't do a damn thing. And you know what I would say? What people should be doing, other than thinking, would be to, I don't know. I mean, the foreign policy is the area in which public opinion is one of the least, has some of the least sway too. I mean, it's like imperialist wars haven't been popular in the United States like since 2 years after 9/11. That didn't end them. But what should we do? I think right now you should be really pressuring anyone who's a Democratic person in Congress with a real threat of withholding your vote, even if it means a Republican winning, if they vote for this war. And you need to get large groups of people to do it. But the thing is, I don't trust the social democratic left to do that. You know, I mean, like, I don't want to like bring up a bunch of bad blood, but after the Jamal Bowman thing, I don't trust that the people will hold their elected officials to any formal initiative or anything. And we also have this weird problem with the Democrats who cynically during the Trump administration started mainlining anti-Russian agitprop. And I say this as a person who was also bothered in the early 2000s, back in the early Obama days, when people were really trusting Russia Today as a news source for anything outside of the United States. It's actually good on the RT is actually pretty good on the U.S. because if you're going to hit your geopolitical enemy with something, it's best to hit them with something true. But like they would trust them on other things like what Russia was actually trying to do, and that used to bug me. But watching some people who did that in their early 20s and their but during their resistance phase, 5 years ago, becoming diehard anti-Russia stands, that I think that's important. But I also think we shouldn't any view we have of Russia and Russian ambitions does need to be hemmed in with the idea that this is like Russia is not the USSR. We are not dealing with a socialist or even an aspirationally socialist state. That NATO should not be encroaching on it for reasons that have nothing to do with the morality of Russia. And I mean, it's not even like with the CPC or the People's Republic of China, where you could argue that there's an anti-capitalist project going on. That's not the case with the Russian Federation. So we should be very cautious in how we defend Russia domestically against war. That's what I think we should be doing. And I also think, aside from protesting and writing your congressperson, and by the way, if you don't mean it, don't do it. Like you actually have to be willing to let a Republican win. Which, is not an easy thing to say. And if you're in a district and area, I mean, look, we're dealing with a day where there's 1,000 fires at once. Abbott's thing in Texas happened today, where basically
nuts.
Transition's been declared, like he's declaring that under Texas law, transitioning is child abuse, and they're not just going to go after the parents, but also anyone who doesn't inform, because by declaring it child abuse, you have to inform on people involved. So that's happening right now. We're barely over people taking idiotic stances one way or another in the trucker convoy situation.
Yeah.
I mean, like, if anything, I would say, write to your congressperson. I not because I believe electoralism is going to work here, but if you have any leverage electorally, it is to deny them your vote. And then be very realistic about how you advocate for this, because we have to be honest that like NATO has been and will continue to be a threat to world peace, regardless of what we think about the states it's threatening. And with Russia's economy is energy based, and since the dip in about 10 years ago, its economy is about the size of Italy. It needs a safe zone. We've actually been pushing people into its trading zone by sanctioning them, like Belarus example. So sanctions are likely to actually make parts of Eastern Europe more dependent on the Russian economy. And they're also likely to try to replicate the Cold War situation, pushing Western Europe back into the kind of, what our friends Danny and Derick over at American Prestige would say, the transatlantic superstate that really kind of exists here. The other thing I think we should be looking out for is what is Macron and Xi doing? Because those, France has no interest in NATO actively taking up competition with Russia. Macron has made that very clear. And Xi has no interest in things getting completely out of hand either. And so we should be following that. But I wish I could tell you there was more to do, but I don't see it right now.
Yeah, this thing is bigger than it's bigger than any one individual. I mean, this has been a long time coming, just based on all the things that we've talked about here. It's still kind of harrowing and a little terrifying, but it's like, what can we do? As especially as podcasters or whatever the fuck. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I guess my closing thought, and I'm going to shut the fuck up, is that things right now are a domino, and we actually do have to accept that some of this is out of our control, and that we're going to have to start gearing up to deal with rolling with things that are out of our control. And I think in the Imperial core, we have long since forgotten that.
It's part of why people responded so poorly to this pandemic, to this crisis.
Right.
We ain't used to this kind of thing.
I will say energy prices are going to go crazy.
Yeah.
So people are talking about that. I just saw that bent oil bent crude oil now is selling for $100 a barrel again. So, and there will be all kinds of profiteers on all sides over this shit. And I suspect when we're already in a period of what looks to be kind of, well, it's not quite technically stagflation, because stagflation usually implies layoffs, but prices rising to recoup any workers' gains so fast that it looks pretty bad. And with the Fed and the reserve banks around the world all gearing up to raise interest rates, I mean, the amount of dominoes right now are just getting more and more expensive.
You're Varn pilling us again. The Varn pill is hitting.
I think the conclusion we really need to land on is: have you seen Better Off Dead, and would you recommend it to our viewers?
Yes, I have, and it's good.
If you like John Cusack, you're a John Cusack fan. That's what this podcast. If anybody here, I just want to say thanks again to Jason for pairing our tiny little podcast, Bad Takes, me and Jay Andrew World's tiny little movie podcast, leftist movie podcast, where we watch not so great or forgotten bad movies or whatever. This one wasn't that bad, but I want to thank Jason for. Yeah, it was a fun one. Thanks to Jason for he was our guest, and then he also paired a show, and pretty much all our audience right now is his. So that's why you see I mean, I'm practically the same color as the walls behind me, as you can see, but that's why you're seeing all us on here and not him. He had to duck out, but we're gonna wrap this thing up. This started as a movie podcast, and then Kuba called, and then I wanted to get Varn in here to chat about it. But thanks for joining us, Varn, and talking to us about that.
Thank you guys, because I'm not going to talk about this on my own channel, except to give people history on it. I had Dr. Harun Yamez to talk about the nationalisms and Ukraine. And we were actually not going to talk about Ukraine. I had scheduled this 2 months ago. I was trying to give people some understanding for what happened in the Soviet situation, for what may happen in the future. And while the May became, hey, it's happening, motherfucker. And I was like, oh shit. But yeah, I'm not going to be talking about it there because I don't want to be part of the hot take industry and what could become a live war.
That's a very reasonable. That's what we come to expect from C. Derick Varn. Thank you, Varn, the smartest guy in the room as always. But
Not Kuba
if y'all
was
don't,
today on this. Let's be fair.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
But
that's also
y'all
why,
weren't in the room at the same time.
my first question to him was the whole issue of the history of it. So, that was kind of good. I'd like to see. I'm glad we got that out there because that history does need to be talked about a bit, and I don't think the right people are talking about it.
No, yeah. Please God, don't get your news from Axios or something right now. like read Reuters if nothing else. Like
Vox has an explainer though, man. Like what's
hey,
Vox has a history of Ukraine.
Oh man,
This is rough.
Yeah, some of those things are actually not inaccurate. They're just spun in subtle ways, which actually makes them even harder to deal with. But anyway,
I will say their graphic design stuff, when they do the history of graphic design, spot on for Vox. So, good on them for that. But
oh my God. And if y'all don't know J. Andrew World, also co-host of the Movie Night Extravaganza, which we're paired with that one too. We're paired like crazy right now. If y'all don't know me, I'm Joe Payne. I'm just a random I don't know what you call it. I'm on hiatus right now with my main show, Political Payne. You can find me on Twitter at Political Payne. But I was just a local journalist who started doing my own kind of shit on YouTube, and then start talking to all these crazy commies like C. Derick Varn and Jason Myles and all of them. And this kind of shit is. I'm really glad to be having conversations like this. So, you guys want to call it a night?
Yeah, I need to go to bed.
Yeah.
All
yeah,
right.
I think my wife is wanting me to shut off the lights. So,
of course, hopefully there's better news in the mañana.